work has been done, but it has been also not without challenges, but with great successes also. And my name is Paul. I'm going to moderate this conversation for us this afternoon. And all my speakers are here already. We have been very honored to have Professor Eddie Maloka, who's the CEO of APRM. I'm going to be introducing him shortly. We have our colleague Stephen Grozet, who is also from SIA, South African Institute, International Institute of International Affairs. And then we have Susan Mwape, who is also going to join us from his Executive Director at Common Cause Zambia. But before we do that, just a bit of house rules. We're going to be allowing our presenters to do the presentation for the time I'm going to allow them to do so. And then we're going to have a Q&A after they've done the presentation so that they can respond to the questions and comments. And then I would like to ask that we use our chat box to post in any details that you'd like to ask, follow-up questions, and anything, comments that you want to make. Please do make use of the chat box. I'll be looking there now and then to pick up questions that we can post to our presenters. And then we're going to be concluding. So it's not a very long conversation. It's a maximum of 1 hour, 15, 20 minutes, 1 hour, 15, 20 minutes there. But otherwise, so good to have everyone on joining us. We also want to say that we're also joined by colleagues from Conrad and Inno Stiftung, who have been supporters of the African Policy Circle, our funders, and we're glad to see our colleague Nathan joining here this afternoon. And I'm pleased to note that we've enjoyed, as African Policy Circle, enjoyed their ongoing support. African Policy Circle is a think tank of a network of 15 or so think tanks here on the continent. That our work is to convene this kind of thematic conversations that will help us to understand the context of our continent as far as socioeconomic and political developments are concerned, but also to amplify our voice as think tanks, that we can be able to contribute meaningfully to conversations around our development on the continent. And also it goes without saying that also members of APC are here, the different think tanks from the different countries joining us here this morning, stretching all the way from Southern Africa to west of Africa. And very soon we're looking to see our colleagues from the northern part of our continent also joining the network. It's a free membership network. And so we look forward for some of those who are not members of the network from the continent and you'd like to join us. We'll be sharing the details thereafter that you can be able to follow up with us, and we're going to gladly welcome you on board as one of the members. And for the APRM, I'm sure most of you have heard that this important institution, it has been around for the last 20 years. And I'm going to allow our colleagues, CEO, Professor Eddie Maloka, to speak more about that. But just suffice to say at this stage, they have been doing a lot of work allowing member countries from around the continent to join and do self-monitoring assessments as far as their commitments to ensure good governance in their countries concerned, best practices, and where there are deficiencies, they allow themselves to be, to address them, and supported by the Secretariat, APRM Secretariat. And we're going to hear more of that and how they go about that work from our colleagues from the APRM. So having said that, we're going to get straight into the conversation today. And remember that we'd like you to tag APRM. I'm going to be posting the hashtag and other social media handles for you to help us in spreading the message. We are live on YouTube, I think I'm told, and therefore the conversation is going beyond just what we are here at the platform. So without further ado, we're going to have a conversation starting off with Professor Maloka, followed by Stephen, and then followed by Susan in that order. And so I'm just going to read a short bio of Professor Eddie Maloka. He's currently the CEO of the African Peer Review Mechanism, an organ of the African Union responsible for promoting good governance on our continent. He's also a visiting professor at the University of Witwatersrand School of Governance, Public and Development Management in South Africa. He's also the chairperson of the African Governance Architecture, AGA, a platform of dialogue among African Union institutions with a mandate to promote good governance and strengthen democracy in Africa, and formerly the president of the convocation of the University of Cape Town. Professor Maloka has had and held several appointments, including this being a special advisor to the Minister of the International Relations and Cooperation in the Republic of South Africa. He has also been South Africa's special representative to the Great Lakes region. He's also been a special advisor to the Deputy President of the Republic of South Africa, an advisor on governance of public administration, post-conflict reconstruction to the new Partnership for Africa's Development, NEPAD. He holds a PhD in history from the University of Cape Town. He did his postdoctoral fellowship at the University of Princeton University in New Jersey in the USA, and he has published widely in areas of history and politics and development in Africa. He's also served as the president of the Association of the African Political Science and the president of the South African Association of Political Science. Such a well-informed CEO leading a very powerful intervention on our continent. Mr. Stephen Gruzet is the head of the African Governance and Diplomacy Program at South African Institute of International Affairs in Johannesburg. He worked at SAIA from 2003 to 2011 and from 2013 to the present. And he works also as a senior researcher at the South African Jewish Board of Deputies. He has published widely on governance and Africa peer mechanism. His interests include African politics, Russia-Africa relations, and South African foreign policy. Mr. Stephen holds a Master of Science from the London School of Economics and Political Science in International Relations and a Bachelor of Arts Honors in International Relations from the University of Witwatersrand. And lastly, but not least, we have Ms. Susan Mwape, who is Executive Director at Common Cause Zambia. Susan's professional interests are in good governance, democracy, gender, human rights, elections, and civic technology. She has over a decade of experience working on the African peer review mechanism and was instrumental in the establishment of civil society APRM Secretariat in Zambia. She's part of the APRM National Governing Council in Zambia and an APRM Continental Communications Champion. Ladies and gentlemen, those are our guests this afternoon, and going to give us a perspective about the 20 years of APRM and what they have observed during these years that we can learn together in supporting this important initiative on our continent. And so without further ado, I would like to invite Professor Eddie Maloka to go ahead with his presentation. Welcome so much, Prof. Maloka.
Thank you very much, Paul, and thanks for inviting me and also for associating me with this important initiative. And I also want to take this opportunity to recognize my two colleagues and co-panelists, Stephen and also Susan, who are well known to us in the APRM. They are part of the APRM family and they are quite active in the APRM work. As you said yourself, that the APRM was founded 20 years ago, and it came out of NEPAD. I remember very well because when it started, President Mbeki was quite key in setting up, I'm talking from the point of view of my involvement, and then through Professor Nkutlu at that time, they set up, I was in that team, we set up, led by Professor Nkutlu, to set up initially the processes that led to the formation of NEPAD, New Partnership for Africa's Development. But there was this element around governance about it, that it was going to have a governance element that that for Africa to move forward, and there was an expectation that we were going to have these development resources and to access them, and then you needed some sort of a governance conditionality, let me put it that way. And but it was not clear on how this was going to be articulated institutionally and so forth. And that's how NEPAD, APRM came about. It came out of NEPAD, and then we then started working. Myself, I was quite involved in socioeconomic development at that time, and we inaugurated. It was inaugurated in Cape Town. I still remember the first panel led by Marie-Angeline Saban of Senegal. and it was inaugurated in Cape Town. So that has been 20 years since then, and it has grown really. And I think at that time we just had a handful of countries that were ready to join, not even 10, perhaps 5 or 6 at most. But now we have 43 member states out of 55 of the total member states of the African Union, and Comoros just joined us recently as the 43rd member, and they are also chairing the African Union. And of course, the Republic of Guinea will soon join us once they are over with their transition in the country. And we have also completed a number of reviews, country reviews, as you said yourself, Paul, the 26 first generation reviews and the so-called second generation reviews, South Africa, Niger. So those that did the big reviews first, now they did them again. We have now done 5 of those countries. And then, of course, we have also conducted quite a number of thematic, or what is now called the targeted reviews, which is quite a recent innovation. I just want to say that myself, I've come to understand APRM as 3 things. As 3 things. The first one is it's a philosophy, and it's a philosophy that or a thinking. Or you could say perhaps, it's a thinking that is premised on this assumption that that came out of the African Renaissance thinking of the time of the early 1990s, that there is a dialectical relationship, triangular, if you say, between governance, development, and peace and security. And that if you need to sort out issues around governance, you needed to also deal with peace and security, and if you needed to sort out peace and security unit, and so on and so on. So that's the thinking that really emerged in the 1990s during that movement of African Renaissance. In the 1980s, the dialectical connection was simply between development and peace and security. So governance was the last late entrant into that formula, and since then, it has been well entrenched. But myself now, with these years I've spent in the APRM, I'm beginning to think that it's more than just a triangular relationship, governance, peace and security, and development. But that governance is to the African condition what the economy is to Marxist thinking. You know, in Marxist thinking, we say that the economy is the base and the others are the superstructure. And I'm beginning to think that governance is the base, and governance is about leadership. And once you get governance right, then actually the challenges of development and also the challenges of peace and security are themselves a manifestation and a result of the deficit and challenges on the governance front. So it's a philosophy, it's a thinking. It's premised on that assumption that the 3 are connected: development, governance, and peace and security. The second thing is that it is a feedback mechanism, a peer-based feedback mechanism to say to colleagues, to say, and this is what makes it unique, to give this feedback to others. You are leaders, you are giving feedback to each other. And that's why even in our own methodology, in generating the reports, we insist on high level or the highest level of ownership and participation. And also in the review itself, the reviews are responded to by at the highest level within countries. We don't take, it has to be at the highest level within countries, because that's what it's. And then the third thing, it's an M&E system. It's an M&E in that countries make commitments. And then, so what we do when we conduct the reviews is that we go to countries and say, you have made these commitments, blah, 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 blah. And then now, based on these commitments, how far are you performing? How's your performance? Then the reviews, as you know, that they will assess the performance of countries in the thematic areas or whatever areas we have identified, which are the commitments. And then we develop a program of action out of that to say, this is how we suggest you respond. And then, of course, you can even say that the mechanism itself is quite participatory. It's not a top-down, it's a bottom-up process. And now we've even improved the involvement of the youth, women in APRM processes. So over the last few years, we have had to revitalize the APRM because APRM went into it took off and then it declined. And the decline was largely due to the governance model that the mechanism had chosen at that time. You know, some African Union bodies, they establish them as councils, like they can establish as a commission. So initially it was established as a panel. The APRM was established as a panel, and the secretariat and other bodies were subsumed under the panel, and they were there to serve the panel. But now the member states, even before my arrival, they realized that formula didn't work well. So they've now created a much more diverse structure. And that's what really has liberated and has been able to assist the APRM to realize its full potential. The panel is still there, but now it's part of the ensemble of capacities within the APRM. And the things that we have achieved with the revitalization, of course, is to strengthen the APRM philosophy. And there's still some challenges even now, that the philosophy is still there, as I was explaining it, but the feedback mechanism, that's where we still have a challenge. We need to improve our working methods within the APRM itself. So we've done some reforms internally in terms of how you structure the forum, how we make the forums more engaging, and so on, because over the years they became a little bit constrained by African protocol requirements, and which are positive, but also became a constraint somehow. So we are trying to strengthen the feedback mechanism in that, and it's one of the areas that we've done some progress, and we continue to improve it, and we want the engagements to be more robust and more direct, and so on. And it's an area that we are working on. And of course, it's linked to the other area around that, which is the ensuring compliance with APRM principles, which is the implementation of the program of action. And it's a big challenge, and I'll come back to it. The other area that we've managed, myself, when I arrived here, I just understood the APRM from the beginning when we set it up, and I was never involved in the APRM. So when I started my job here, I realized that whereas the national APRM, continental APRM structure had collapsed, when I was visiting countries, I found fully fledged APRM national structures with offices, with buildings, with staff, huge staff engaged, and that they continued to work even at the time when the national structure, the continental structure had collapsed. And that's when I realized I couldn't understand why people were referring to me as continental CEO, because then when you get into countries, then you realize they are also national APRM CEOs and so on. So what we have done now is that we have enhanced the role, position, and you could say the importance of national structures in the APRM architecture. And that's what we have done now with the statutes. The statutes now recognize fully the national structures. At the national level, we have the politicians, who are the representatives of government, the focal points, the ministers. Then you have the National Secretariat, and then you have the National Governing Council. So in some countries, they model the national structure around the National Secretariat, in others around the National Governing Council, but in others they combine both. But either way, so across the continent, our member states, you find there will be a focal point. So now what we have done is that we've created a coordinating body for any National Governing Council, and we also created a coordinating body for National Secretariats, and they meet on continuous basis. They share experience and they visit each other also, like Namibia now was recently in Uganda, and it also happens in other parts. So it's something that we've introduced to enhance the role and the importance of national structures in the APRM architecture. Even us at the continental level, we've even changed our perspective and our understanding, in that now we understand that we are part of this APRM family, that its constituent elements include the bodies that you find at the national level. And then the integration into the African Union, that it was tough, but we have achieved it. It was in stages through the reforms. We are assisted by the reforms that were taking place in Addis Ababa, but it has now been concluded, and it helps because now it guarantees APRM resources, because the old APRM were reliant on member states' contributions now, which was quite a little bit unreliable, but now we've moved now into the AU, so now we we are now part of the AU budget. And the second thing where it assists us is that it has improved our systems, our methods. You know, we're operating outside the AU and a little bit looser structure, even in terms of governance. Now that we're under the APRM, there is under the AU has its own staff rules, administrative rules, and a lot of requirements. It was tough for us to move, and it took us about minimum 3 years just to make that transition. We're still not yet fully into it because our structure was approved the year before last, and now they've allocated resources this year. So we are now beginning to migrate our staff now into the new structure. So the transition has been there hard, but it is necessary, and it has benefited the APRM in terms of giving us security, guarantee, and now we don't have to even though that we still do go out and mobilize resources from partners, but we don't worry before with operations. So in the past, you used to, in the middle of the year, you are worried where you're gonna get money for paying for your overheads, paying for salaries. Every month you'll be worried. So we no longer have that worry. The only now is just to expand and so on. And it also helps when they were integrating us into the AU, there was a debate among member states. What model of integration? Full organ, none, what? Initially, we started as a specialized agency. Now we became a full organ. But when they were giving us a full organ status, the organs are listed under the Constitutive Act of the African Union, is the Peace and Security Council, you know, the Pan-African Parliament and so on. But member states insisted that you can't make APRM full organ in the same sense that others are organs, because you want it to maintain its functional autonomy. They use the word functional autonomy, so that because in order for the APRM to conduct its work, it must be independent and it must be free of political interference. So so we are an organ, but with functional autonomy to enable us to go into countries and write these reports about countries without any political interference, any political pressure, and countries feel comfortable with us, like President Museveni said, writing reports on them that allow them to reflect and to give them an opportunity. And of course, we have broadened the scope of the work of the APRM beyond simply the country reviews. As Stephen said, I know it was before the session, now, instead of just reviews now, anyway, I'll come back to it, but the point is that now what we have done in the scope of work, we have now expanded our work now to look at Agenda 2063 and the SDGs, the governance aspects, SDG 16 and Agenda Aspiration 3. So, and we have done a lot of work there, and we've moved into there. So these are, you could say, the non-traditional areas of the whole APRM will simply be conducting reviews. But today's APRM, we are the focal point for South-South technical South-South cooperation in Africa, because APRM it's a model for South-South cooperation. We are also doing a lot of work with UN agencies in the areas of relating to SDG 16. They are like the Committee of Experts on Public Service and Administration, CIPA, and so on. So we have broadened our scope of work in that area. And then, of course, also the question of methodology. We have revised our methodology quite significantly as part of this renewal of the APRM of some sort. One is that now with COVID, we realized that COVID exposed one thing that we didn't have in countries, which is resilience. So we had the 4 thematic areas: politics, economics, socioeconomic development, corporate governance. Now we realized that we didn't have, we needed work on resilience. So we introduced the 5th thematic area. There was a technical exercise, and of course it was endorsed eventually by our own structures. Now we have the 5th thematic area is still now operating within the AU's APRM system as an option. South Africa used it for their reviews, others didn't. But now we are finalized. There's going to be a workshop now, I think in Nairobi, early next month, where we're going to validate the questionnaire. We have also upgraded the questionnaire in other departments, especially with regard to the inclusion of issues around the agendas, the 2 agendas, 2063 and Agenda 2030. And also, of course, we have expanded the portfolio of reviews. We no longer look at the old review of 5. We're now looking at thematic reviews as well. When we were introducing the so-called targeted reviews, which are thematic, there was a big debate within the panel that the member states would move away from the big reviews and just go into thematic reviews. And I think what has happened is that member states have invested in both. So some actually use the thematic reviews as a dress rehearsal to prepare themselves for the big reviews. And it has worked out very well. And countries like now we just conducted to Senegal on natural resource governance, and then we're now in the process of completing one. I don't know how far my colleagues are. In Ghana, we're looking at the CFTA issues related to, and also corporate governance. So we have really broadened our scope of work, and I can't go into all of it. And just to say that moving forward as a way of concluding, to give time to the other panel members, is that we really have to work to, we're prioritizing our work on universal accession, because we still have just, I think, about 10 member states that are outside. It's mainly Morocco, I think, where Morocco, Western Sahara, Sudan, South Sudan, Somalia, Madagascar, just a few countries that are outside the APRM family. But for the most part of it, we've covered, but we still have to reach out to those countries. And the member states have given us until in the assembly decision, I think 2023, to complete the universal accession into APRM. And it's also in the targets for the 10-year implementation of Agenda 2063. So the issue of universal accession is quite key. And we are also introducing what we call the Africa Governance Support Program, which will be more like a fund, but we don't call it a fund, we call it a program, because it will be more engaging than that, because we realize that countries generate the national plans of action out of these reviews, but you can see that some countries have genuine fiscal constraints to allow them, to assist them to implement the plan of action. So we want to invest a little bit of resources and energy into that, and we already have an assembly decision. We are now looking at the modalities around this fund, and then we will soon be operationalizing it, and so on. And then the third area really where we want to put a lot of work is on the M&E, as I said, M&E and the feedback mechanism to make the reviews more robust, and also the follow-up, the impact, the measuring impact. So we will be convening now as part of the 20th anniversary, some sort of, you could say, a technical summit of some sort, not summit in the sense of presidents, but a technical summit to bring our member states, partners, stakeholders together to reflect on how to measure impact of APRM work and how to quantify it, and also what are the qualitative variables around it. And to be able, if you are sitting here, to be able to say APRM were 10%, 40%, and so on. So we need to move now the work of the APRM into that zone of where we can strengthen issues around impact, and also the M&E part of the work that we're supposed to do. And I can say myself that I'm happy with what we have achieved. So far, we have now the Africa Governance Report, which is now in its third installment, and it's really quite popular. Countries are using it. We just need to make sure now work more on the implementation of the recommendations that come out of this. So we've just done one now on the unquestioned change of government. So we are in the process of now taking it out into the public and for further engagement on it. And then, of course, we also have something that was not there. And the African Union now, the Executive Council has approved what we call the African Union Corporate Governance Guidelines. So, because if you look at the APRM reviews, the weakest component of APRM within countries, there's always been the corporate governance sector, the state of the private sector, the governance of the private sector, and so on and so on. If you look at all our reports, and Stephen has looked at it, the weakest part has always been the private sector, except maybe for the case of South Africa and Mauritius, the previous reports, but overall. So now we thought that we need to give more attention to the area of corporate governance. So we took the example of the OECD, and then they have the guidelines there for their members. So we have brought them, and then we developed ours. We went into an inclusive exercise for validating them. They have went through the AU processes. Now we'll be unveiling them on the 20th anniversary celebrations, and we'll be rolling them out into across the continent working with relevant bodies. So really just to thank you really for putting this thing together, and to thank everybody and also members who are here on the panel. Stephen, you've been a partner to us, as well as you, Susie. We are working together anyway. Susie, you're part of the APRMs in that you are on the NGC in Zambia. Stephen, you are also part of the APRM in that you are part of the think tank network. So the APRM now, it's a movement. And of course, it's a multilateral exercise, but it has become a movement. And I thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. Eddie, for that very insightful intro comments about the work of APRM from its establishment to where it is and where it is going. I think it's very exciting that we would like to support that kind of initiative ongoing, including the processes that you have highlighted. For the second speaker, we're going to have our colleague Stephen from the South African Institute of International Affairs, who's going to share his experiences. As you've heard Prof. Maloka say, Stephen has been on the go for quite a while on this process, and he brings a lot of experience and wealth of knowledge onto this platform. Over to you, Stephen. You got your 15 minutes.
Thank you very much, Paul. It's quite amazing to look back at 20 years. When I started working on APRM, which was back in 2002, even before it was formally established in 2003, my second daughter wasn't born yet, and she's just entered first year architecture at Wits University. So that's I've been on this road for a long time. So I'm going to just give some examples of the work that we've done recently with civil society to strengthen their ability to play a role in the national process of APRM in their countries. We've worked in 6 Southern African countries so far. And then I will offer some reflections and recommendations for the APRM going forward, some areas where I think it can improve. So the hard-hitting stuff is going to be on the last slide. So please stay with me so that we get there. Here's a snapshot of what the continent looks like. So as Prof was saying, some of the countries that haven't joined are those in white. So you've got Morocco, Western Sahara, Libya, Guinea, Central African Republic, South Sudan, Eritrea, Somalia, Madagascar. Among those are countries with really serious governance deficits, and they are countries that could definitely benefit from being part of the APRM. The ones that are in yellow are countries that have joined but have not yet been reviewed. So that's countries like Angola, Botswana, Zimbabwe, Malawi, DR Congo. Some of those acceded many years ago. Angola and Malawi, for example, in 2004. And 20 years later or 19 years later, they haven't been reviewed yet. Some like Comoros and Seychelles and Botswana are relatively new members. The ones in orange are countries that have had 1 review. So there should be about 23 of, well, 26 in total, but there's 20 something in orange. The countries in red have had 2 reviews, and there are 5 of those: Nigeria, South Africa, Mozambique, Uganda, and Kenya. Then those with the cross-hatching are those that have done a targeted review. So that's countries like Namibia, Zambia, Sierra Leone, Djibouti, Kenya. And Kenya is unique in that it's been a trailblazer in the APRM. It has completed 2 reviews and a targeted review on President Kenyatta's major reform process. So that's a snapshot of what it looks like as a continent. If we look at the throughput rate of when the countries were first reviewed, it took from 2003 till 2006, but we had 3 in that year. Then came South Africa and Algeria. Then there was a lot in 2008 and so on. And then you'll see it dies down. Only 1 in 2010, Mauritius. Only 1 in 2011, Ethiopia. Only 1 in 2012, Sierra Leone. And then between 2013 and 2017, no reviews at all. And Prof took up his role in 2016. And there you can see the acceleration. Some countries doing second reviews, and a definite increase in the throughput of the countries going through the process. We did a workshop way back in 2015 in May in Gaborone, Botswana, where we were trying to establish some synergies between the APRM and SADC, the regional body, the regional integration organization in the region. It wasn't too successful. We didn't get any representatives from the government of Botswana, and we didn't get any representatives from SADC either. But what we can see in the SADC region is that APRM is really growing and thriving. So there's 7 countries that have been reviewed, and a couple of them have been reviewed twice. There you can see the list and the year of review. As I mentioned, 2 joined a long time ago and are moving very slowly. 5 have joined in the last 5 years: Botswana, Zimbabwe, Seychelles, DRC, and Comoros. And there's still 2 in the region that have not joined: Madagascar and Eswatini. So those are on the target list for the APRM's universal accession. Just to excuse the fact that I'm dressed much more casually than Paul is, just to show you, I'm wearing my APRM targeted review t-shirt. So that's why I'm a little bit informal. So we've been working with civil society really throughout this journey. And we started off in the first 4 countries: Ghana, Rwanda, Kenya, and Mauritius. And we did early workshops to alert civil society to the fact that this mechanism was coming and how they could be involved. But we found very much that by them attending a once-off workshop and then us expecting them to run with the process was not working. We found that civil society were often ignored, maligned, criticized, or dismissed by their governments. Their concerns were not of importance. Interest also from the CSO side flagged, and I'm sure you'll hear from Susan what a long journey this can be, and the stamina of civil society to stick with it is difficult. Also, of course, resources as well. We found that governance issues that civil society felt strongly about were not being adequately reflected in the self-assessment reports or the country review reports. When civil society participated, it was often as a token or window dressing. And over the years, we worked in countries like Zambia, Tanzania, South Africa, Lesotho, where we were experimenting with different kinds of models. South Africa and Lesotho, we had something called the APRM Monitoring Project, where we actually worked with groups of civil society for them to almost do a progress report on NPOA implementation. And that was very interesting to see what came out of that. But really, we've come to the conclusion that what we see is the necessity to build capacity through co-creation. And what do I mean by that? So here's a short report that I wrote for the Institute for Public Policy Research in Namibia when Namibia joined the APRM. And there you can see the CEO and the president of Namibia sharing a joke and shaking hands. Namibia, for a long time, was quite skeptical of the APRM and said that it didn't want to join. It was not necessary. It was well governed, and what was it going to be used for, and what was it going to learn? So we set up what we've called our APRM sensitization project, and this is how they work. We try and provide support for civil society in the target countries, as well as the official process. We work with an anchor partner in each country, which is usually an umbrella body or a think tank or a well-connected civil society organization. We start off with a sensitization workshop where we bring in those that have worked on similar projects in the other countries as resource persons to share their experience. The country forms a CSO APRM working group, and then they select up to 12, I think Namibia did 13, key governance issues that they want to put through in their APRM sensitization project proposal. So those are typically education, health, separation of powers, corruption, etc., etc., etc. We work with them also to develop a background paper. We put this all together and validate the report. And then that report is sent to the APRM Secretariat, and it's sent to the national structures. And I must also here say a big thank you to the country coordinators for the various countries where we've worked, Dalma Jama, Eji, and others who've been very, very supportive of our work from the APRM Secretariat. So far, we've produced 5 of these reports with civil society. The one on the left is Namibia, the one in the middle is Botswana, South Africa, where we work mainly with youth organizations, Zimbabwe, which was very challenging in that environment, and Lesotho. And we're currently working on the Malawi report in conjunction with the Malawi Economic Justice Network. Paul, how am I doing on time? Okay, well, if you're not,
we got about 3 more minutes, Stephen.
Okay, so I'll try to go through this quickly. We try to learn lessons from each of the different countries. So in Namibia, we partnered with the Institute for Public Policy Research. We realized that there had to be multiple engagements. The CSOs were quite weak in themselves and had weak connections with them. The National NGO Forum was in a bit of disarray. So they were able to learn from their peers and focus on key issues. They were able to learn about the process early in order to push for a quality report and process. It was important to involve government to build trust. We also recognized that giving small incentives, financial incentive for people to help write the report was useful. And we didn't do a background paper in Namibia, and I think that made putting the report together a bit more difficult. So that's something that we instituted in further countries. But it was interesting because of the work that we've done in Namibia. When the president announced the National Governing Council, NGOs in Namibia felt that there was not sufficient representation for civil society, and they wrote to the president, and they actually sent him CVs of people that they wanted to put onto the body. And in the end, the president did inaugurate 3 new civil society members on the NGC. So positive can happen. In Botswana, we partnered with the Botswana Council of NGOs. This was really difficult. We had to pivot online because it was happening in the middle of COVID, and we had to adapt our methodology. As I said, we used a background paper. We also recognized we have to buy data for our delegates if they're going to be joining online. It was very important for the Botswana stakeholders that the report be non-partisan, and we managed to also produce a short video on the Botswana process. In South Africa, as I said, we focused on youth, but not only what people call youth issues, like unemployment or education. It was, what does the youth think about climate change? What does the youth think about how Parliament works? We worked with an organization working in the youth sector called Jasoro Consulting. And the fact that this was also entirely done online meant we had over 100 participants and were able to reach all 9 provinces through technology. The use of WhatsApp groups was pioneered and very successfully used. All of these little subgroups were empowered to spend their budget as they wished. And we learned that we need to do an even shorter video. 2 more countries. In Zimbabwe, we partnered with the Savio Institute. As I said, it was a tough governance climate. And in Zimbabwe, we are witnessing closing civic space, particularly in the run-up to this year's election, I should say. The private voluntary organizations bill is very worrying to many civil society organizations. They were skeptical of window dressing, and this is quite a hard-hitting report in the end. And we tried something different. We put together an infographic on all the key issues in the Zim report that ran in one of the national newspapers. Lesotho was interesting because we partnered with a small but very vibrant organization called the Governance Institute for Sustainable Development. It was demand-driven. They actually knocked on our door and said, Lesotho needs a second review, but there's nothing happening in the country. Please, can you come in? So there was a bit of a push for a second review. This happened to be a hybrid model because we were able to travel again. We also learned the value of offering discussions in the local language. There were some problems with Zoom, but what was also very interesting is that this report is feeding directly into a process of governance reforms that the government has initiated. In Malawi, we're working with the Malawi Economic Justice Network. I've been to Lilongwe twice. It's a work in progress. The drafts are being evaluated, and we hope to launch by the end of June. So now the much expected final slide. Okay, I'm not going to talk about some of the common issues that have come up in the reports or the outliers, and I've gone through most of these lessons. Here are my 4 points for the APRM to ponder. One is that the system should ensure that the reports are published on the website 6 months after the heads of state peer review in the forum. That's what the rules say. And we're finding that the reports are taking far too long to be released to the public. Sometimes it's because of the national structures that want to have ownership and a national launch, but it's also a way of burying the report. The most extreme example was Tanzania, which only launched its report 4 years after the report was finished. The APRM also does very useful summaries, and we believe these should also be published as well, because not many people read the long reports. I think it's very important, I know this costs, but it's something worth investing in, that all reports should be published in all AU languages. I know maybe I'm wrong, but the last time I checked, countries like Mali and Chad were only available in French, and that is a hindrance to people wanting to work with them. I think Prof was talking about it in his discussion on M&E. We really need a short, pithy document where we can show that the APRM has made a difference in the countries where it has been. What are the tangible, practical outcomes of the APRM that we can celebrate? And the last recommendation goes to governments, who need to really take seriously the recommendations that are made by the APRM, that their NPOAs are realistic and integrated with their budgets and their national development plans. And sorry if I've gone a little bit over. That's how you can get hold of me. That's my email, that's my Twitter. And also to say, we run a Facebook page called Engage APRM, where we have about 800 people around the continent who swap information on APRM. Apologies if I've gone a little bit over, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Very, very powerful, insightful review of how civil society can support and contribute towards APRM mandate. And thank you so much for even sharing those lessons. I'm sure Prof. Maloka and the team will take them into consideration when they prepare for that technical summit, which Prof mentioned, that will be looking at the question of measurement. I think there is a powerful link there, but also to see the active nature of civil society in provoking their countries to accept this self-monitoring process. I think it's a very much commendable process. And of course, despite the COVID-19 challenges, there's still a lot that has been done. And we still recognize there's still a long way to go, but at least something is happening that is very useful to support the mandate of the APRM process. And of course, to tag along the new areas that Prof. Maloka did mention, where APRM is heading into. Now, lastly but not least, we're going to invite our last speaker for the session, and that is Susan Mope. Over to you, Susan. Thank you so much. Keep on sending your thoughts and questions on our chat box. After Susan, we're going to go into a short Q&A session. Over to you, Susan. You got your 15 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the invitation. It's such an honor to be joining this conversation and speaking after two very important people who have been very supportive of my journey in the APRM, Prof. And Steve. Paul, may I please request that I switch off my video because my bandwidth is not great?
All right, you may do so, please, Susan.
All right, thank you. It's dancing and shaking. So just as a way of beginning my presentation, I will just share a reflection of the journey on the APRM. I'll share a few of my experiences in the process and observations, and then I'll also share some suggestions on how I think the mechanism can do better. But something that stood out for me today is that I was counting, Steve, and I realized that when we met sometime in 2005, I was actually 20 years old. And at that time, I was no longer a teenager. And just like the APRM today, the APRM is 20. And so I believe 20 is a magical number because after me,
Susan.
And learning about the APRM, I never before my country even began the APRM process. Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go for it.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you. So having said that, it's worth noting that since 2003, when the APRM was born, so much has happened. And I think from the time that the founding fathers conceptualized the process, so many things have changed. The journey of the APRM has come full circle, and I think Professor did a good job in elaborating how the APRM was this tool that was supposed to be used for good governance, and now it is actually an organ of the African Union. The journey itself has had many highs and lows, and from somebody who has been following the journey from that far back, I have had many memorable moments, many high moments, many low moments. But one thing that remains certain is that the APRM's continuing importance on the African continent remains steadfast. We have seen the mandate itself of the APRM expanded. We have seen the APRM itself grow from just being a mechanism that just looks at governance and reviews to now monitoring the SDGs, supporting the African governance architecture and many other things, including the fact that even the methodology of the reviews itself have changed over time. Inclusions have been made to even just the thematic areas to strengthen the early warning side of the APRM itself with different calamities that are befalling our continent and the world at large. So from 2003, when the APRM came, what I remember is that a lot of the first countries or the pioneer countries that began the APRM process and the reviews themselves focused a lot more on doing the base reviews. And because of that, there always was the challenge of one, resources. It was very expensive to fund full reviews. They took a very long time to complete. And it was just quite an expensive venture. And I think also there was a lot of anxiety because here was a process that was asking strangers to come into your countries and assess your governance and then tell you how best you could do it, even though you were having an input in the process. It was still scary. But from that time, now 20 years later, we are talking about 43 countries having come on board. And that is actually has not been a small achievement on the part of the APRM. Coming from civil society myself and coming from Zambia, we in 2007 established a civil society APRM secretariat. At that time, not many civil society organizations were involved with the APRM. It was organizations like SAYA that were bringing together civil society and trying to raise awareness around the APRM itself and giving an opportunity for civil society to actually understand where they fit into the grand scheme of things and how they could influence and contribute to the process. So through that, we saw that there was a growth in the number of organizations as well, civil society in particular, coming on board to participate in the APRM, trying to develop reports. And I won't speak a lot on this because I think Steve has already done a stellar job. I am honored to actually say that the journey that SAYA has taken has been beneficial to me as well, because often I have been given the opportunity to share our experiences and also to go to other countries and learn how they are doing things so that we could also strengthen our processes here. But over time, there has really been a decline in the number of sustained civil society engagements. Yes, we see efforts being made to get civil society to participate in the process, but so many things happen in the process. One is that civil society may come together and develop a civil society report to make input to the overall APRM process. But you would find that, for instance, just as the case of Malawi, where many years go down the line after acceding to the process, there has been no movement. Civil society can only do so much. And it takes a lot of advocacy, a lot of national level governance challenges always affect the APRM one way or the other. And because of that, either the government becomes relaxed or reluctant to go ahead with the APRM. The revitalization agenda of the APRM has really contributed to helping ease those tensions, but I still think that we need to think of mechanisms that can open up those kinds of challenges. How do we come in through the APRM process to ensure that those kinds of redundant efforts are pushed and brought to fruition? And then over some of the other issues that I've observed over time is also the popularity of targeted reviews. And I think Prof put it very well to say a lot of countries are using them as a dress rehearsal instead of just going straight into the main reviews. But I also feel that To some extent, that has sort of shadowed the overall importance of having those based reviews, because targeted reviews, whilst they serve the immediate purpose, I think that the main reviews give an opportunity to look at all these other thematic areas that are often sidelined. And even when you look at civil society engagements within the APRM, even across the continent, with the many experiences that I've had, civil society strengths are within certain thematic areas and not all the APRM thematic areas. So the value of the main reviews still remains high, and it would be very important to also ensure that we get more countries to actually commit to having their full reviews, aside the targeted reviews that just focus on 1, 2, or 3 key areas that a country feels are problematic. Also, at the time of the APRM back then, we did not see a lot of youth participation. There were very few young people in the APRM. There were very few women. Things have changed. I would like to actually commend the Continental Secretariat at, for instance, ensuring that they have a lot of women at the Secretariat who are working in the thematic area, leading the processes. We have more young people in the APRM process through the Youth Symposium. We actually have an APRM desk in the Secretariat led by Lennon, who's doing a stellar job at ensuring that young people on the continent come on board. And through those efforts, we've seen a lot of interest from young people who are now even doing researches around APRM and just trying to find their place and ensuring that their issues are covered. Namibia, for example, undertook a targeted review that actually focused on youth unemployment, and there were a lot of young people who participated in those processes and still continue to push the agenda of what the challenges they face are and how they can be used through those thematic reports. And then the early morning aspect of the APRM has always been of great value. I think from the onset of the APRM, we saw that every time that a report came out, a national APRM report came out, it had some early warning aspects. And for those that ensured that they addressed those issues, there were a lot of tangible values. In as much as that has been the case, the issue that was raised by Steve, for example, of the late publishing of reports undermines that particular aspect, in the sense that countries go through a review, they produce a report and a program of action, and then it takes a long time before that report is made public. So the monitoring and evaluation aspect of ensuring that the national program of action is actually implemented gets lost in translation. And also, a lot of things get overtaken by events. In Zambia, for example, we had that exact experience. We had multiple heads, we had about 4 or 5 heads of state take over the APRM within our first main report. And so in the course of that, a lot of the issues that were raised in the program of action for implementation were overtaken by events. Things did not happen. I mean, we could have benefited more from the APRM review itself, but because the process took too long, we were not able to implement certain things, and certain things just became redundant because they were overtaken by events. So it is still very important to ensure that we have more countries ensuring that they publish their reports on time, but also that those reports are popularized, that they are simplified. Yes, at continental level, they can be published in the different languages, but I think it's also important to ensure that at national level, that is also happening, because when countries go through the APRM process, there's always a sense of relaxation after the review. When we get to the part of implementing the national program of action, not much movement gets to be seen. And so for me, the idea of the African Governance Support Program, the fund that Prof talked about, is a really welcome move, because then it would help different stakeholders to be able to ensure that the national program of actions are implemented, but also that other sectors like civil society are able to come and monitor and encourage their respective governments to move on the implementation of the program of action. And then the fact that we have more youth participating is very important. I think that we do not, when we talk about the APRM, we are talking about all these different things, but I feel that we do not celebrate ourselves enough. The APRM has achieved so many great things, and it would be prudent for us to ensure that we begin to really celebrate those achievements. In addition to the legacy reports that the Secretariat, the Continental Secretariat produces, countries should also ensure that they submit their progress. Sure, just the value for money is very important. And also, I think that the Continental Secretariats in the early stages of the APRM, one of the biggest challenges we had from civil society, for example, was that it was very difficult to engage with the Secretariat. There were not enough avenues that allowed for civil society engagement with the Secretariat other than during the reviews. So we are now seeing that at Secretariat stage, they have really opened avenues for civil society engagement. They created a civil society unit, a civil society network that works on the APRM and well, it is facilitated at the Continental Secretariat. That in itself has created a better opportunity for civil society to engage. But there's still a decline in sustained engagement by civil society. For example, during the APRM—
Susan,
yes?
Can you please round up, please?
Sure. So, for example, during the 10th anniversary celebration of the APRM, there were a lot of civil society organizations. There was a lot of donors who were interested in celebrating and highlighting the successes of the APRM. So we need to bring that back on course. And so thank you very much. I think my last statement would be that we need more real action from the member states. We need to attain the universal accession and also ensure that the APRM goes higher and higher and achieves the benefit that we all aim to achieve for a better Africa. Thank you very much, Paul.
Thank you so much, Susan, for that extensive experience of the work you've done and you're doing together with your colleagues in Zambia. I really do appreciate it. I think those recommendations are very, very much linked to what Stephen did share at his session. And I think they will add a lot of value if we continue to get them absorbed into the next plan of actions of APRM as it looks into furthering the work, as Prof had indicated in his introductory comments. Now, I know our time is really moving very fast. I'm going to allow one or two questions to any of the speakers. And perhaps one of them that has just been posted is directly related, I think, to Stephen. Somebody's asking here, Stephen, is it mandatory for civil society organizations to be involved in the measurement processes of the countries? And if yes, what kind of connections do they need to have with the host governments? Over to you, Steve.
Thanks, Paul. Let me just put my camera on. Yes, the rules do provide for this to be a consultative process. A lot of that is up to the government of the country to decide how that's going to be. So typically, national governing councils, which is like the board of directors for the process, will be a mixed government, civil society, business, labor kind of body. So that's one way. They also are meant to participate in helping to put the self-assessment report together. They are meant to meet the panel of experts when they come into the country to do the country review mission. But we found that there is an invitation to civil society to become involved. I think governments can open or close the doors to a different extent. They can, make a very transparent and open process where they listen, or it can be a very symbolic, facts already decided, fait accompli, and civil society is just there for window dressing, and there's a continuum in between that. So, what was the second part of the question, Paul?
That if CSOs can be involved, what's the role of host country governments in supporting their involvement?
Yeah, so that's host country governments are meant to involve them. We found the work that we've been doing through the APS project is that civil society shouldn't wait for government. In fact, civil society should be working on this stuff to put pressure on government if needed, to get them to accelerate, to get them to take civil society seriously. But civil society is messy. It's not hierarchical. It's not everybody covered by the umbrella. There are rivalries between civil society. There are agendas, there are issues, etc., etc. I think taking all of that into account, we found what works best is when we try and focus a big group on a small number of issues. And it's much easier to say this comes from, this critique of corruption comes from 25 national institutions rather than one institution saying it. It's much easier to be swatted aside. May I just abuse the fact that I have the platform to ask the Prof a very quick question? Yes. Okay.
Yes, go for it. Yeah.
Two things. One, I don't think countries are very good at branding the reforms that they make as APRM-inspired reforms. So, for example, in South Africa, we were told that floor crossing doesn't make sense in our proportional representation system. We scrapped it, but nobody ever said that was one of the things that the APRM recommended. Another example is access to information laws. I see Namibia has either passed one or just about to pass one. Ghana passed one. These were all recommended in the APRM reports. Again, there was no branding. There was no saying this report was partly because of something that the APRM diagnosed. So that's the first one. And the second is APRM is excellent at early warning because it is a conversation with citizens around the country at a particular moment in time. But what worries me is that we only see in hindsight which was the most important recommendation. So when we have xenophobic riots in South Africa in 2008, we go back to the 2007 report and we see, among the 150 things that was recommended was, please watch the situation and don't let it get out of control. In Kenya, out of the 150 recommendations, after the post-election violence, we can see beware of the electoral system and the way the ethnicity card is played in Kenya. So how do we get to a point where we can see what's coming before it happens, rather than going back and seeing what happened after it's happened? Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Steve. I'll ask Prof. Go ahead and respond to that and provide some clarity. Thank you so much, Prof.
No, thank you. Thank you very much to Susan and also to Stephen for sharing with us very interesting and insightful thoughts. I think the question that you are raising, Stephen, it's a very important thing. It's work in progress. That's why you have to be at that event that we are putting together for May, because that's exactly what we want to do. We want to design a tool that will enable us to not to answer that question, but to be able to be utilized by countries as a tool that they can be able to. So you need something that takes out the recommendation, deploys them, and as they are being implemented, throws them back into society and reflects. So we need something like that. And we currently have, I was like yesterday we're in Durban and my colleague was presenting our M&E system. And I was saying that, in the APRM, like now you've just referred to some facts about South Africa, about Kenya, that the colleagues in the M&E section are sitting with a lot of these national progress reports from countries and so on, but they have not been digested into a coherent narrative about the impact, where we are struggling, and so on in terms of implementation. And I think it's something that we have to resolve. And I look forward, Stephen, you can share with us, but you should talk to us also offline, because even some of the suggestions you have around civil society and some of the things that Susan raised as well, we must incorporate them in the work that we need to accomplish at this meeting that we are planning for May, because we want from there then to be able to take the APRM at a higher level. Now that the integration into the AU, the governance issues, I think those will be resolved quite conclusively in the next few years. But the bigger challenge for the APRM is impact, measuring it, being able to anticipate and drawing on that impact for further gains and acceleration of governance reforms and governance, deepening governance on the African continent. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Prof. And maybe perhaps to follow up on that question, Robert Lexasi is asking if APRM is a good governance tool, why is it not used in the governance indices? Do you have any insights about that, Prof?
Yes, we do have an index. We are completing our own index. We're quite advanced, actually. I think we are just about, or we have just validated it. And no, we've developed our own index. It has taken quite a bit of time. And that index, as you know, then will be used in different ways and will be deployed in our work. Definitely, we are just in the process of, we have completed it, but I think we're either validating it but we are just at the last stage of the whole exercise of developing the APRM index here.
Right, thank you so much, Prof. And it's another question about the whole issue of involving civil society and in the whole process of measurement. And somebody's asking, what are the plans, maybe it's still at an early stage, but what are the plans that the APRM is exploring to ensure that civil society is involved in the measurement of impact?
No, but Susan is there, she can answer. Remember the National Governing Councils, they are a civil society entity. Some people forget because they are part of the APRM formal structures, but by definition, they are not supposed to be government. They are led by civil society. They are multi-stakeholder entities within the APRM family for civil society presence in the APRM process. And the APRM exercise is led by the governing councils. So it's led, and the governing councils are not state. The president of NGC is not a state board person. It's these are eminent Africans within their own home countries. But then beyond the national the NGC, National Governing Council, then you have what Stephen has been talking about and Susan, additional layers of civil society engagement in APRM exercise during the reviews. It's compulsory. Somebody said mandatory, yes. It's a requirement. You can't complete an APRM exercise, be the self-assessment, whatever, without it having been validated by the country from bottom up, through a bottom-up exercise. So it must be validated by the country, bottom up, and then of course formally adopted by cabinet before it's sent to us. So it's a very involving process, and civil society involvement. Of course, we are not perfect. You can see that we still have some challenges, but it is a requirement, civil society involvement, youth and women as well, in the APRM exercise, and including in the MNE. And the NGCs are supposed to be playing that MNE role and so forth. Thank you very much. And Susan had some ideas herself on how APRM national structures, even civil society at the national level, can be able to deploy the very philosophy and processes and systems of APRM for governance MNE. I think she made that point during her presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. And just lastly, I think this question is for Susan, where somebody is asking how have they gone about encouraging young people to participate actively in the APRM processes in Zambia, and what kind of lessons could they share, 2 or 3 lessons could share with countries that are struggling to bring young people interested in APRM process. I know colleague Lennon has been doing an excellent job in creating this platform for young people to participate, but the question is directed to Susan. Susan, just 2 minutes. What would you recommend as other countries who are trying to get young people involved, but they're not winning like you're winning?
Thank you very much. I hope that Lennon can also come in on this one, because I think he's on this platform. But what we did in Zambia to get more young people to participate in the APRM is that we tried to involve them at every stage. So for example, when we started with the country self-assessment review process, we had a civil society network that was created with a number of civil society organizations, and we ensured that we brought on board youth organizations to bring the youth to participate and share their issues. Secondly, we also created a publication. We had a newsletter that we used to produce where we asked young people who were cartoonists or artists to share their different skills and to tell their stories on what issues they wanted highlighted within the APRM process. So it was just a case of ensuring that they're involved every step of the way, when the National Governing Council was being established, through civil society, we submitted a list of organizations and individuals that were suggesting be included. And we ensured that there were young people from youth organizations and even just young eminent people who we felt could add value to the process. So I think what I would say is that the goal is to ensure that at every stage or at every step of the way, you involve them. At continental level, we have seen the symposium. Every year it takes place. It draws youth from across the continent. There are WhatsApp groups for discussions. There are pages on Facebook. Also, I'd encourage you to go on Facebook and follow the Engage APRM page for more updates on the different things that are happening, and also the Continental Secretariat's APRM page and Twitter. Thank you.
Good stuff. Thank you so much, Susan. That's very, very powerful and practical. Before I give you a platform, Steve, there's actually one last question, which is for you. Somebody's asking just in brief, how have you managed to navigate the political dynamics of countries to get them interested in APRM? As you respond, please also respond to that question. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you. In fact, that was one of the things I wanted to say. You know, when I was writing, I wrote a piece which I shared in the chat a little bit earlier, reflecting on 20 years, and I was searching for an analogy on, you know, how have we as a civil society body operated over these last 20 years? And the image I got was the oxpecker, the bird that sits on the back of the hippopotamus and the rhino and the giraffe and eats the insects. Sometimes the animal wants to swat it away or give it a bite. So sometimes relations are not all that great, but in the end, the oxpecker is trying to do something for the rhinoceros to make him more healthy and to make him the best rhinoceros he can be. So I think that's one of the roles of civil society, is to be there constantly, hovering around, understanding, close to what's happening, but also ask the pointed questions when they have to. Look, it is a political process. I think Prof probably has many, many stories. I think it's about being mature. It's about understanding the motivations from where the different players come from. I mean, just an example, in South Africa, in the first review in 2006, 2007, we were very, very critical of the way that government was doing it. We felt it was rushed. We felt it was insufficiently methodologically sound. We felt that South Africa would send a bad precedent for other countries to do a very superficial review, and we got hammered. We were criticized. There were personal attacks. There were media campaigns, etc. It was actually very fraught. We've written about this in our book, APRM Lessons from the Pioneers, which came out in about 2007. But there is politics. I think you must recognize from the start that it is an inherently political position. We're talking about sensitive issues. No government likes to admit its failures or its deficiencies or its challenges, but that's really part of what this is all about. The diagnosis is as important as the cure. Yeah, there is politics, and so one has to be mature about it. You have to have allies. I think it's much easier to be in a group, and you're much more likely. But you know, and you have the right as a citizen to question what your government does, and do it in a way, you know, like Susan said, they wrote to government and they said, this is who we think should be on the governing council. So it is political terrain, no question about it, and don't be naive and understand you're going to have to navigate the waters.
Thank you so much, Stephen. That's very useful input there, and I think gives us an idea about how we could go about civil society organizations as individuals and other agencies to support an APRM process in the country. And I think one of the comments that Susan has put in there is that civil society should never relent, that it's a key stakeholder in the APRM and should ensure that the engagement continues. I can't overemphasize that as much as we can. I think this is very important to say that out of what we've had today, we recognize the importance of this important tool to help countries to self-monitor themselves, examine, and encourage the process of transparency and ensuring that we collectively promote good governance, good ethical political establishments, and stability on our continent. And by way of rounding up, since our time is gone, I would like to thank Professor Eddie Maloka for making time to be here with us this afternoon, for sharing extensively the work that he's doing and the APRM in doing. We support you, sir, and we thank you so much for making that time and sharing that wisdom with us. APRM is in good hands, although I understand that your time is coming to an end. I'm sure we would like to see you more and more in this work, and hopefully also in the next phase of your work, we'll be able to support the process that you put in together for us. And also want to thank Steve from the South African Institute of International Affairs for the great work we've done also in putting up that presentation for our learning. To Susan Mwape, who also appreciate the work you've put together and also supporting the process. Not forgetting Conrad and Steve Tang, represented by Dr. Dix and Nathan Mkoma, who are here on this platform, for supporting the work of APC, African Policy Circle, and the African Policy Circle members who also made time to join us and to support us. And not least of all of you who also came on board to support this process and help us with ensuring that our conversation is healthy. We exchange ideas, but also to know where do we move from here. And I'm expecting that at some stage you're going to be getting some of these invitations of the process that Prof mentioned in his remarks that are going to follow up. I think it will be useful for us to be able to engage with those. So long as they are open to the public, we'll love to participate in those also. We're going to host our follow-up webinar on the 19th of May. And this time around, we'll be talking to the African Union itself in celebrating its 20 years since inception. Please do mark your calendars. We'll send an invitation together with presentations that have been made today and other documents that we'll find very relevant for you and your understanding of the work of APRM in the course of time. Having said that, I would like to declare our webinar ending, and thank you so much for your participation and engagement. Thank you, Prof. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you very much, colleagues. Thank you. Bye.
Right. Bye-bye. Bye.
Well done.